A woman set out for an early morning walk in the middle of a winter blizzard, but she never made it to the trail. Less than an hour after she left her house, a local driver noticed a strange orange glow burning at the bottom of a steep embankment. When emergency crews arrived, they found an SUV completely engulfed in flames, with a body inside so badly burned that visual identification was impossible. At first, it looked like a tragic winter accident, a driver losing control on an icy road in a terrible storm. But the deeper investigators dug into the life of the victim, the more this case started gripping the entire country. Because what unfolded next felt less like real life, and more like a calculated crime thriller. Welcome back to Retrograde Crime, Retro Gang. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the squad. Because today we are diving into a case where a perfect life, a perfect alibi, and a perfect tragedy completely fell apart. The burned-out SUV was registered to a prominent local family, Ashley Millns and her husband James. In their small town of Collingwood, James was a highly respected fire captain, a man whose entire job revolved around putting out the exact kind of fire that had just claimed a life. When police tracked James down at his secondary snow removal job to break the news, he was completely devastated. Standing out in the freezing cold, he refused to accept that his wife could be dead, insisting she had simply gone out for her usual morning hike. As James was taken to stay with relatives to process the shock, detectives began treating the scene as a horrific traffic mishap. It was a comforting theory for a grieving town. Except, as investigators began sorting through the wreckage, they discovered a string of text messages sent from Ashley's phone just minutes before the crash. Messages that seemed to explain exactly how this horrific accident happened. Except for one detail: the tracks in the snow couldn't hide. To understand why the police were so quick to believe this was a tragic accident, you have to understand who Ashley and James were to the community. From the outside, their life looked absolutely flawless. Ashley Millns was born into a highly successful, wealthy family in Toronto, Canada. Her father had built a booming career in finance, meaning she and her 3 siblings grew up wanting for nothing. Ashley was naturally creative, eventually earning a university degree in Canada, before moving to the United States to attend art school. When she returned home, she built a highly successful business of her own, staging luxury homes for sale as an interior designer. She was vibrant, active, and loved the outdoors, frequently hiking, running, and skiing. It was at a private ski resort that she met James. James came from a similarly prominent background. His mother held an executive position at Warner Brothers, and his grandparents had founded a well-known charity organization. The two clicked instantly, bonding over their shared love for nature and their dream of building a family. They married in 2012, welcoming a son and, 3 years later, a daughter. While Ashley continued her design work, James pursued his dream career, joining the fire department and working his way all the way up to captain. Seeking a quieter, nature-filled life for their 9-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter, the family moved to Collingwood. It was a small town surrounded by pristine national parks and lakes. By 2023, James was a pillar of the community, highly respected as a fire captain and working extra hours doing snow removal just to keep busy, even though they were already incredibly well off financially. Ashley had taken a job at a local development firm, decorating houses. They had money, status, beautiful children, and a bright future. So, when James sat down with investigators after the crash, they had absolutely no reason to doubt his integrity, and the timeline he laid out for that morning seemed completely rock solid. James explained that the night before, he and Ashley had gotten into a minor argument. Ashley wanted to head out for an early morning hike on one of her favorite trails near the ski resort, but she wasn't planning on taking the family dog. James argued that this meant he would have to walk the dog himself, leaving their young children home alone while they slept. It was a standard, relatable domestic dispute, and James told police they decided not to let it ruin their night. By the next morning, James said, the tension had passed. He woke up early to head out for his snow removal job and to walk the dog. And the digital evidence James willingly handed over to the police backed up every single word of his story. First, there were the text messages on James's phone, sent directly from Ashley's number that morning. The text chain painted a perfectly logical, chronological picture of a tragedy unfolding in real time. In the first message, Ashley apologized for snapping at him the night before. James replied warmly, telling her the kids were still fast asleep and that he could handle walking the dog with no issues. A little later, Ashley texted him again with a complaint. She realized she had forgotten to take several heavy gas cans out of the SUV's cabin. She had filled those cans the previous day to fuel James's snow removal gear, and she texted that the fumes inside the car were so overpowering that she was forced to drive with the windows completely rolled down, despite the freezing winter temperatures outside. Then came the final, crucial message. Ashley texted James stating that she was suddenly experiencing a severe episode of vertigo. James explained to detectives that Ashley suffered from chronic inner ear issues, and that the intense, toxic smell of gasoline inside the cold car had likely triggered a sudden, blinding dizzy spell. In her last text, Ashley wrote that she didn't feel well enough to hike, so she was turning the SUV around to just head back and do her workout at home instead. To the investigators, this was the missing puzzle piece. It perfectly explained why the car smelled like gas, why the windows were open in a blizzard, and why she had gone off the road. She was suffering a medical emergency while driving a vehicle filled with volatile fuel. But James didn't just have text messages. He had something even more bulletproof: video evidence. He showed detectives footage from the security camera mounted outside their home. The video clearly captured James leaving the house to walk the dog. Then, just a few minutes later, the camera showed Ashley's SUV pulling out of the driveway and driving away. It was a tech-backed, airtight alibi. James was blocks away on foot when Ashley drove away toward her fate. It looked like a tragic, open and shut case of a medical episode mixed with volatile fuel. But when the forensic team looked closer at the vehicle's tracks and the position of Ashley's body, the physics of the accident simply stopped making sense. While the digital trail on James's phone painted a picture of a tragic medical mishap, the physical reality at the crash site was telling a completely different story. Forensic investigators specializing in accident reconstruction began examining the embankment where Ashley's SUV had gone off the road, and almost immediately, the red flags started piling up. The first major anomaly was left in the fresh snow. When a driver suffers a sudden dizzy spell or loses control on ice, the natural human instinct is to slam on the brakes, causing the tires to skid or slide. But there were absolutely no brake marks on the asphalt or in the powder leading up to the ditch. Instead, the tire tracks showed that the SUV had maintained full traction, moving in a perfectly straight, deliberate line right up until the exact moment it rolled over the shoulder. It didn't look like an accident. It looked like someone had intentionally driven the vehicle off the road. Then came the second, even more baffling detail from the medical examiner. Ashley's body had not been found behind the steering wheel. Instead, her remains were located on the front passenger side, slumped slightly forward of the seat. While a violent car crash can cause a body to shift, the physics required to throw a driver completely into the passenger footwell without the vehicle rolling over multiple times simply didn't add up. With doubts mounting, detectives decided to interview Ashley's extended family. If investigators expected to find a grieving family accepting of a tragic accident, they were severely mistaken. The moment Ashley's relatives heard the official narrative, they flat out rejected it. To them, the story made zero sense. Ashley was an experienced, lifelong outdoors woman who respected nature. She would never set out for an early morning hike in the middle of a blinding, dangerous blizzard. Furthermore, her family pointed out a massive flaw in James's timeline. Ashley was a fiercely protective, devoted mother. The idea that she would ever agree to leave her 6- and 9-year-old children entirely unattended in the house while James walked the dog was something her family refused to believe. When detectives began asking what the marriage had really been like behind closed doors, the image of the perfect, affluent family completely shattered. Ashley's relatives blew the whistle on who James truly was. According to them, James was an intensely insecure and deeply controlling man. His need for dominance extended into the smallest, most everyday details of their lives. He forced the entire family to strictly follow his own rigid diet, throwing furious tantrums if the wrong types of food were brought into his house. Her family revealed that the move to Collingwood, far away from Toronto where most of her relatives lived, wasn't a mutual decision. James had pushed for it specifically to isolate Ashley from her support system. When family members did come to visit, James's behavior was profoundly unsettling. He rarely spoke or interacted with anyone. Instead, he would sit silently off to the side, saying almost nothing, just quietly and intensely watching Ashley's every move. The moment guests left, explosive arguments would break out. Ashley's sister recounted a terrifying instance where she accidentally overheard James screaming at Ashley behind closed doors, hurling the harshest, most degrading insults imaginable. Over the years, this constant emotional abuse had completely chipped away at the marriage. The perfect couple was a total myth. They were living entirely separate lives, staying together solely for the sake of the kids. But it was back at the snow-covered ditch where the absolute bombshell of the investigation dropped. As forensic teams carefully combed the perimeter of the burned-out SUV, they found a pristine set of physical clues that the raging fire hadn't managed to destroy. Fresh footprints were pressed deeply into the snow, leading directly away from the SUV's driver's side door. They followed the path of the tracks as they climbed back up the embankment and disappeared onto the quiet road. The terrifying reality instantly crystallized for the detectives. Ashley's body was in the passenger seat. Someone else had been behind the wheel of that SUV. Someone else had deliberately driven it into the ditch, and that person had calmly opened the driver's door and walked away into the dark while the vehicle erupted into flames. Detectives now knew they were dealing with a homicide, and James was their prime suspect. But they were facing a massive problem. How could James have committed the murder when his own security cameras proved he was blocks away walking the dog? To find out, police knocked on the doors of James's neighbors, and what they found on their security loops changed everything. With a homicide investigation now officially underway, detectives focused entirely on breaking James's seemingly bulletproof alibi. He had given them a precise, detailed route that he claimed to have taken while walking the family dog on the morning of the crash. It was a calculated move meant to show cooperation, but it turned out to be his first massive mistake. Detectives physically went to the neighborhood, driving the exact path James claimed to have walked. They knocked on doors and requested the surveillance footage from every single doorbell camera, security system, and ring camera along that route. Investigators sat down and painstakingly reviewed hours of video from multiple angles. The result was definitive. James never appeared on a single frame of footage. He had completely fabricated the entire walk. This lie immediately led detectives back to the security footage James had willingly provided from his own home. When they first watched the clip showing James leaving with the dog, it looked clean. But when cyber investigators pulled the full, unedited recording directly from the home server, the illusion shattered. James had only shown them a highly edited, cherry-picked snippet. The complete, uncut footage revealed a damning sequence of events. James walked out of the house with the dog, waited until he was just out of the initial camera angle, and then turned right around and slipped back inside the house just a few minutes later. If you are locked into this mystery and want to see how the rest of this twisted case unravels, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now and join the Retro Gang so you never miss an episode. James's digital defense was totally compromised. But the most chilling, definitive escalation came when detectives sat down to interview the couple's 9-year-old son. Children are often the most honest witnesses in domestic cases, and what this little boy told investigators made their blood run cold. The boy explained that in the middle of the night, long before the sun came up, he was suddenly jolted awake by the sound of his parents screaming at each other. The argument was incredibly loud and hostile. Frightened, the 9-year-old walked out of his bedroom and stepped into his parents' room to see what was wrong. The moment Ashley saw her son standing there, she looked at him in total desperation. She begged the boy to run and bring her a phone because she needed to call the police right away. But before the child could hand the phone to his mother, James intervened. He forcefully told his son that everything was fine and commanded him to go straight back to his bedroom and go to sleep. Terrified, the boy did exactly what his father said, leaving his parents alone in the dark. A few hours later, closer to dawn, the boy woke up for a second time. He walked through the quiet house and found his father sitting alone in one of the rooms, quietly crying. When the boy asked where his mother was and what was wrong, James didn't give a real answer. He simply wiped his face and told the boy that Mom had already gone out for an early morning walk and would be back later. James then told the child that he was going to take the dog out, and he exited the front door. But as the boy stood alone in the house, he noticed something deeply unsettling. James had claimed he was leaving to walk the dog, but the family dog was still sitting right there inside the room, staring at the door. James had left the house entirely alone. Every single piece of domestic and digital evidence was now pointing toward a horrific reality. James had lied about the dog walk, he had edited his own security footage, and he had hidden the fact that his wife had been desperately trying to call the police hours before her vehicle was found burning in a ditch. The medical examiner's autopsy report finally dropped, confirming Ashley hadn't died from the crash or the smoke. She had been strangled hours before the fire ever started. Suddenly, a terrifying picture was forming. James hadn't just covered up a crime. He had spent days meticulously planning it, and he had even dropped a hint about his dark intentions to a local doctor. The autopsy report completely shifted the timeline of the entire case. This wasn't a panicked cover-up of a domestic argument that had gone too far. As detectives dug into James's actions leading up to that freezing January morning, they realized they were looking at a cold, calculated blueprint for murder. James had spent days planning exactly how to eliminate his wife and make it look like a tragic accident. The first bizarre piece of premeditation trace evidence went back 5 days before the murder. James had attended a local social event, where a medical doctor happened to be present. During what seemed like a casual conversation, James suddenly steered the topic toward action cinema. He explicitly mentioned that he was a massive fan of Steven Seagal movies, and then asked the doctor a highly specific question. In real life, was it actually as easy to break someone's neck the way the actor does on screen? Given the way Ashley ultimately died, detectives saw this conversation as a chilling sign that James was already actively visualizing the logistics of killing her. 4 days later, the day before the murder, James began setting his physical trap. He went to his mother's house and asked to borrow her vehicle under a completely manufactured excuse. He claimed he was planning a long, scenic hike the following morning and wanted to stage her car in the parking lot of the private ski resort so he could drive himself home once he finished the trail. His mother, having no reason to doubt her son, handed over the keys. Surveillance cameras later captured James driving his mother's car to the resort parking lot that evening, parking it and leaving it there. He had officially staged his getaway vehicle. That same day, James made sure the tool for his cover-up was ready. He explicitly asked Ashley to fill up several heavy plastic gas cans, claiming they had completely run out of fuel for their commercial snow removal equipment. Ashley did exactly what her husband asked, loading the full cans into the back of her SUV. She had no idea she was delivering the accelerant meant for her own disposal. Sometime during the night, after their 9-year-old son was forced back to bed, James carried out his plan. He strangled Ashley to death inside their home. Once she was dead, James meticulously dressed her corpse in full, layers of winter hiking clothes. He carried her body out to the family SUV and placed her into the front passenger seat. James then got behind the wheel and drove his dead wife to the dark, empty parking lot of a nearby ski club. A distant surveillance camera captured the outline of the vehicle stopping in the pitch black. For several minutes, James carefully poured the gasoline Ashley had purchased the day before all over the interior of the vehicle, intentionally keeping the fluid away from the driver's seat so he wouldn't catch fire himself. With the vehicle prepped, James drove the SUV out onto the secluded, snow-covered road. He rolled down the windows to feed oxygen to the impending fire, accelerated, and steered the vehicle directly over the steep embankment into the ditch. James jumped out of the driver's side door at the very last second, leaving the footprints investigators would later find in the snow. He stepped back, pulled out a lighter, and tossed it into the gas-soaked cabin, triggering an immediate, massive explosion. But James made a critical mistake. The personalized lighter he used, which had been a gift engraved with his own initials, survived the blast. With the car burning behind him, surveillance footage along the road captured James calmly jogging through the blizzard like a morning runner, heading straight for the resort where he had staged his mother's car. He drove her car back to town, parked it at a nearby school, and walked the final block home to pretend he had just been out walking the dog. As for those convincing alibi-building text messages, detectives pulled the cell tower location data for both devices. The digital footprints proved that during the exact window of time Ashley was supposedly texting James about her vertigo attack and the gas smell, both phones were pinging off the exact same cellular towers, moving at the exact same speed. James had been holding both devices, texting himself from Ashley's phone to create a digital ghost, but his digital trapping went even deeper. Investigators seized his computer and found a dark history of internet searches. Weeks prior, he had searched for information regarding divorce, asset division, and child custody. Then, his searches shifted drastically. James began typing questions like, "Does a road flare burn completely?" and "Can deleted iPhone search history be recovered?" James killed his wife to avoid splitting his assets and losing custody of his kids in a divorce. He thought his meticulous timeline made him untouchable. But investigators digging through his phone uncovered one final, hypocritical twist that proved James wasn't just trying to escape his marriage. He was already planning a new life with someone else. With the digital alibi completely shattered and the physical evidence pointing directly to a calculated homicide, detectives pulled one final, deeply ironic twist from James's personal phone logs. Throughout the investigation, James had weaponized Ashley's past affair with her boss to paint himself as the aggrieved, patient husband who was simply trying to save his marriage. But a deep forensic dive into his own encrypted messaging apps revealed a staggering level of hypocrisy. James was also having a secret affair. Even more shocking was the identity of the woman. He was sleeping with a woman named Alexandra, who happened to be the exact ex-wife of the boss Ashley had been involved with. Alexandra had divorced her husband immediately after discovering his infidelity with Ashley. Sometime in late 2022, amid the fallout of that discovery, James and Alexandra connected and began their own clandestine relationship. While James was busy installing surveillance cameras all over his house and policing Ashley's phone under the guise of rebuilt trust, he was actively planning a future with his mistress. Just days before he strangled his wife, James sent a chilling text message to Alexandra. He wrote that he had finally made his choice, stating, "I'm ready to do what is necessary to be happy." He never explicitly detailed what necessary meant, but less than a week later, Ashley was dead. With a mountain of forensic data, cell tower tracks, neighborhood surveillance clips, and the heartbreaking testimony of his own son, police had more than enough. 1 week after the burned-out SUV was discovered in the ditch, James was arrested and officially charged with first-degree murder. For a long time, James maintained his innocence, stubbornly relying on the narrative that the police were misinterpreting a tragic road accident. But as the trial date approached and the state's case grew entirely insurmountable, his legal team shifted strategies. In July 2024, James agreed to a plea deal. Under the strict terms of the agreement, he was required to stand up in open court and fully confess to the exact mechanics of how he murdered his wife and staged the scene. During his sentencing hearing, James turned to Ashley's family and offered an apology, stating that the brutality of what he had done would haunt him for the rest of his life and that he deserved whatever punishment the court handed down. The judge sentenced James to life in prison with no possibility of applying for parole for at least 20 years. The very first time he will even be eligible to request a hearing will be in the year 2045, though there is absolutely no guarantee he will ever walk free. The immediate aftermath of the arrest and conviction completely upended the community of Collingwood. James was promptly fired from his position as fire captain, his legacy stripped away. In a beautiful show of solidarity, his former fire department organized a massive community fundraiser for the couple's 2 children, successfully raising around $150,000 to help secure their financial future. But money could not fix the total destruction of their lives. The 9-year-old boy and 6-year-old girl, completely stripped of the life and stability they once knew, were taken in by Ashley's brother and his family. To protect the children from the intense media scrutiny and the dark shadow of their father's crimes, the family made the decision to permanently pack up and move to an entirely different city. As part of his criminal sentence, the court handed down a strict protection order. James is completely barred from having any form of contact with his children until they turn 18. Even after they reach adulthood, he is legally forbidden from reaching out to them unless they explicitly choose to initiate contact with him first. It is a deeply haunting end to a case that stunned a nation. The ultimate tragedy of this story lies in the sheer, cold calculation of a man who spent his entire professional career mastering the mechanics of fire to save lives, only to turn around and use those exact same life-saving skills to construct a fatal, fiery trap for the mother of his children. If you want to make sure you never miss another deep dive into cases like this, make sure to drop a like on this video. Hit that subscribe button and join the Retro Gang. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you're always notified the second a new video drops. I want to hear your thoughts on how this entire investigation unfolded. Head down to the comment section and let me know your opinions on these 3 questions. 1. Do you think a 20-year minimum before parole eligibility is a fair sentence for a murder that involved this level of meticulous, multi-day premeditation? 2. How do you think the case would have turned out if James hadn't made the critical mistake of lying about his dog-walking route, which forced police to check the neighborhood cameras? 3. What do you think was the most damning piece of evidence that completely ruined his attempt at the perfect alibi? Thank you for watching Retrograde Crime. Stay safe out there, Retro Gang, and I will see you in the next video.